Good morning, or is it good afternoon where you are? I'm not sure. I'm Andrew Knapp, and I'm here to talk to you in Athens about Franco-German relations as the motor or the heart or something of European integration. Where does a newly elected chancellor go on his or her first foreign trip? To Paris. Where does a newly elected French president, and there are more of those than newly elected German chancellors, go on his or her first foreign trip? To Bonn, formerly, and now to Berlin. This relationship is crucial for both countries. As Alistair Cole says in his excellent book on Franco-German relations, the Franco-German relationship has more institutional, economic, and political leadership than any other grouping within the EU. So we want to know why it's so important, how it's shaped the EU. What are the structures behind it? What are the tensions behind it? And also, because it's a dynamic phenomenon, international relations never stand still, we want to know how the partnership has developed in the past few years, whether it's stronger, whether it's weaker, whether it's more equal or less equal, and so the state of the partnership today. So you can see I've roughed out 8 sections for this talk. We'll be talking first about personalities, that's always quite fun. Then we'll be looking a little bit more at the structure of the relationship. What has France got to gain from it? What's Germany got to gain from it? Then I want to spin it out, the structure, into 11 landmarks, starting at the beginning of European integration, the European Coal and Steel Community in 1950, and going on to the present rather crisis-ridden situation. Then fourthly, I'll ask what makes this relationship really count in the European Union? And I'll concentrate on 3 aspects there. I'll argue then, or I'll suggest then, that it might be viewed in E, our 5th section, as a partnership in decline, and suggest possible reasons why it might be viewed as that. In F, I will suggest models for the relationship and look at the state of the relationship in G before concluding finally. So let's start off with personalities. And you've got, I think, a plan of this talk on Word with a few pictures in front of you. So have a look at that, whether you've printed it out or you're looking at part of your computer screen. And we start off, I suppose, with the trio of Monnet, Schumann and Adenauer. Jean Monnet, Frenchman, who was born into a family that made cognac, the wonderful French brandy, in the west of France. But very rapidly, as early as World War I, became very able, a very effective negotiator in the supply of arms to the various Allied belligerents in that first conflict. And he then became part of General de Gaulle's entourage in Algiers in 1943-44 and became, on de Gaulle's appointment again, the first head of France's planning commissariat. So he's not a politician, he's a business type, a civil servant type, and he tends to act rather behind the scenes rather than openly. The French founding father of European integration is generally regarded as Robert Schuman, at any rate the political founding father. Robert Schuman, born in Lorraine, which, when he was born, was actually part of Kaiser Wilhelm's German Empire. So only becomes a Frenchman in 1918. And he's behind these very early steps. And finally, the German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, first Chancellor of the Federal Republic from 1949, had been mayor of Köln, the Rhineland German city, and was very much not exactly an anti-Nazi resistant, but certainly very separate from the Nazi Party during the 1930s. And these three men were, along with the Italian Alcide de Gasperi, were very important in the very early steps of European integration. But then if you want to look at really close Franco-German duos, partnerships between two people, of course you have to start with de Gaulle and Adenauer. Adenauer, who is invited by de Gaulle to his personal residence at Colombey-les-Deux-Églises in 1958. This is a terrific honour. De Gaulle invites very, very few people indeed to Colombey. Adenauer comes in September 58. He's rather worried about de Gaulle. He thinks de Gaulle is a French nationalist and rather anti-German. He's pleasantly surprised by de Gaulle, and particularly by de Gaulle's promise to respect the Treaty of Rome. And the two men forge a pretty solid relationship, which finds its high point in the exchange of state visits in 1962. Adenauer, in July 62, attending Mass in the cathedral at Reims, where French kings had traditionally been crowned, and where Germany had signed one of the surrender documents to the Allies in 1945, in May 1945. And then de Gaulle travelling to West Germany, to Bonn and to other cities in September 1962, and particularly giving that terrific speech in German in Bonn. And you can see links to both of those on the plan I've sent you. And that then rolls out into the Franco-German Treaty of 1963, of which more later. Now, another successful Franco-German partnership, albeit perhaps not quite as high-sounding, not quite as symbolic as de Gaulle and Adenauer, was Giscard and Schmidt. Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, President of France from 1974 to 81, and Helmut Schmidt, Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany from 1974 to 1982. So almost precise contemporaries in terms of their leadership. And they're both former finance ministers. They're not great European visionaries, but they do have a very good close mutual understanding, and they do a certain number of practical things. They create what will become the European Council. It's under their leadership that Europe gets its first direct elections to the European Parliament for the first time. Europe gets a European monetary system. These are not sort of grand gestures, but they are important for the formation of the European Union. And, well, you'll see again, there are two video clips. I find the conversation between the two men from 2013, when Giscard was already well into his 80s and Schmidt already well into his 90s and puffing at his cigarettes endlessly. I find it a rather touching conversation, albeit rather a pessimistic one. And then I think the third great Franco-German partnership, Mitterrand, the socialist elected in 1981, who would remain president until 1995, and Helmut Kohl, the Christian Democrat, who became chancellor in 1982, and who lasted, of course, as chancellor until 1998. And their close partnership is perhaps inaugurated by François Mitterrand's Bundestag speech of January 1983 in favour of Euro missiles, which was doing a favour to a degree to Helmut Kohl. And then there are these great symbolic moments, the moment at Verdun in particular. You've got a link to it in the plan I sent you, the two men clasping hands at this terrible battlefield where France and Germany lost so many men in 1916 in particular. And then they're identified with the high point of European integration, that is the Single European Act, and above all, the Maastricht Treaty of 1992. And then there are the other partnerships, some of them, frankly, poor. Look at that picture of de Gaulle with Adenauer's successor, Ludwig Erhard. Their relations were really pretty bad. They were marked, among other things, by the empty chair crisis of 1965. Then there are mediocre relations, de Gaulle and Kiesinger, Erhard's successor, Georges Pompidou and Willy Brandt, Jacques Chirac and Gerhard Schröder, who clashed notably in the negotiations over the Nice Treaty in the year 2000. So, relations aren't always terribly good. But note, however, that there have been some major achievements without these great big symbolic partnerships. The Rome Treaty in 1957, for example, didn't see a particularly strong Franco-German partnership at that point. Or the summit at Den Haag, The Hague, the Dutch capital, in 1969. It was a meeting, among others, with Pompidou and Brandt, who, on a personal level, didn't get on so well. Or the Lisbon Treaty of 2007. It's not an outstanding partnership that created that treaty. Chancellor Merkel, of course, has been in office since 2005 and has therefore seen as her partner three French presidents. Nicolas Sarkozy, 2007 to 2012. Sorry, she's seen as her partners four French presidents, in effect. Chirac from 2005 to 7, Sarkozy 2007 to 12, Hollande 2012 to 2017, and now Emmanuel Macron. These relationships have been not outstandingly good, but not particularly poor either. They have been rather variable. I think with Macron, there is something close to a genuine meeting of minds, and perhaps in other circumstances, this might have become one of those really strong symbolic partnerships. But both figures face significant political constraints, political difficulties at home, and I think that has made the partnership perhaps a bit weaker than it might have been. Now, it's always fun to talk about personalities, but what do they actually do? What do they achieve? One way of looking at it is that they reduce transaction costs. If you trust somebody, it makes negotiating with them so much easier, so much simpler, especially at moments when things have to be done quickly. So it makes life simpler between the two countries. It allows them to do things with fewer formalities, less confidence building, and so on. And secondly, given that we live in an age where the television media are so important, there's a certain symbolism attached to a strong partnership. De Gaulle and Adenauer at Reims, de Gaulle in Bonn, Mitterrand and Kohl at Verdun. And symbolism is an important dimension of the relationship. But it would be foolish to imagine that the relationship depended entirely on personalities. Of course, it doesn't. It is also structural, and that's what we'll look at next.